In 2024, Kendrick Lamar shook the music world with the release of GNX, an album that, much like its namesake, defied expectations. Kendrick's album pays homage to the legendary 1987 Buick GNX, a car that rewrote the rules of American performance in an era when muscle cars were thought to be fading into obscurity. You see, the 1980s weren't exactly a golden era for American muscle. The roaring V8s of the 60s and 70s had been strangled by emissions regulations, skyrocketing insurance rates, and the lingering effects of the oil crisis. By the time the mid-80s rolled around, the muscle car seemed like a relic of the past. Then, out of nowhere, Buick dropped a bombshell, the Buick GNX. This was no ordinary Grand National. The GNX was a street-legal assassin, a car that came out of the shadows, destroyed everything in its path, and disappeared just as quickly. It was faster than a Ferrari, more brutal than a Corvette, and wrapped in the body of a car your grandfather might have driven. But make no mistake, the GNX was one of the most menacing muscle cars ever built. Kendrick Lamar didn't just name his album GNX for no reason. The Buick GNX holds deep personal significance for him. His father drove him home from the hospital in the parent model, a Buick Regal, in 1987, the same year the GNX was released. That moment, with Big Daddy Kane playing, was essentially the soundtrack to his first ride in the world. To understand the GNX, we need to rewind a few years and look at how Buick, of all brands, found itself at the forefront of performance innovation. In the early 1980s, Buick dominated NASCAR with its Regal, proving that the brand had more than just comfortable cruisers in its lineup. This motorsport success inspired Buick to bring some performance excitement to its road-going models. In 1982, they introduced the Grand National, a special edition of the Regal meant to celebrate their racing dominance. But here's the thing, the original 1982 Grand National wasn't really that special. It looked cool with its two-tone paint and special badging, but under the hood, it was just another slow, emissions-choked V6-powered car. That changed in 1984, when Buick introduced something radical, a turbocharged 3.8-liter V6. Suddenly, the Grand National wasn't just a marketing scheme, it was a serious performer. By 1986, this turbocharged Buick was producing 235 horsepower and 330 pound-feet of torque, numbers that were highly respectable for the time. Its blacked-out, menacing appearance and surprising speed made it an instant hit. But Buick wasn't finished. They had one last trick before the Grand National bowed out for good. For the final year of production in 1987, Buick decided to go all out. They partnered with McLaren Performance Technologies, yes, that McLaren, and ASC to create the most extreme version of the Grand National ever made. This wasn't just a slightly tuned-up Regal, this was a factory-built muscle car assassin. The GNX, short for Grand National Experimental, received many upgrades that transformed it from a quick car into a terrifying one. The already potent 3.8-liter turbocharged V6 got a bigger Garrett T3 turbo, a more efficient intercooler, a recalibrated ECU, and a freer-flowing exhaust system. Officially, Buick rated the GNX at 276 horsepower and 360 pound-feet of torque. But here's the secret. Those numbers were conservative. Independent testers found that the real output was closer to 300 horsepower and 400 pound-feet of torque. That's the kind of power that could shred tires and send unsuspecting drivers into warp speed with just the tap of the throttle. To handle all that torque, Buick and McLaren reinforced the GNX's 204R automatic transmission, added a beefier rear axle, and installed a special rear suspension setup to improve traction and launch performance. The result? The GNX could hit 60 miles per hour in just 4.6 seconds and run the quarter mile in 13.2 seconds at 104 miles per hour. That was faster than a Ferrari F40, a Porsche 911 Turbo, and even the almighty Chevrolet Corvette. This was unheard of. A Buick, a brand associated with quiet, cushy sedans, had just built the fastest American production car of the decade. The GNX didn't just humble a Ferrari, it was was the only car at the time that could challenge the Lamborghini Countach. And considering Enzo Ferrari was nicknamed Il Drake, it's not a stretch to think Kendrick knew exactly what he was doing with this reference. He's got a history of strategic shots, and this one might be his fastest yet. The GNX wasn't just about blistering speed. It was also one of the most menacing-looking cars of the 1980s. While the standard Grand National was already intimidating with its all-black paint scheme and no-nonsense design, the GNX took it up a notch. One of its most noticeable upgrades was the addition of wider fender flares, allowing room for beefier tires that improved grip and handling. These flares gave the GNX a more muscular stance, making it look as fast as it was. Functional fender vents were integrated into the design to help keep the turbocharged V6 running cool under pressure. These weren't just for show. They actively improved airflow, preventing heat buildup and ensuring the GNX could sustain peak performance. Unlike the standard Grand National, the GNX replaced traditional Buick emblems with special GNX badging, reinforcing its exclusivity. Completing its menacing appearance, the GNX featured a stealthy, blacked-out front grille that made it look even meaner. This design choice gave the car an intimidating, no-nonsense look, perfectly fitting for a machine that dominated the streets. Unlike flashy muscle cars with stripes and hood scoops, the GNX was subtle. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you might mistake it for a regular Regal. That was part of the appeal. The GNX was the ultimate sleeper, a car that could pull up next to a Corvette at a stoplight and leave it gasping for air. Inside, the GNX was more about business than luxury. The digital dash from the standard Grand National was replaced with an analog gauge cluster that included a turbo boost gauge. A numbered plaque on the dashboard reminded owners that they were sitting in something truly special, one of only 547 ever made. The GNX wasn't just fast on paper, it backed up its reputation on the streets. Owners quickly discovered that the car's incredible torque and turbocharged power delivery made it a monster from a standstill. With a few minor modifications, GNXs easily ran sub-13-second quarter-mile times, putting them in supercar territory. Even in stock form, the Buick GNX outperformed many so-called performance cars of its era, proving that brute force and turbocharged efficiency could rival and even surpass some of the most respected sports cars of the time. Against the 1987 Chevrolet Corvette, which clocked a 0 to 60 mile per hour time of 5.9 seconds and ran the quarter mile in 14.4 seconds, the GNX was noticeably quicker, making a statement that American muscle didn't always need a V8 to dominate. Even the Ferrari Testarossa, a mid-engine Italian exotic, couldn't escape the GNX's wrath. With a 0 to 60 mile per hour time of 5.2 seconds and a quarter mile time of 13.5 seconds, the Ferrari was left trailing behind the turbo Buick. The GNX even edged out the Porsche 911 Turbo 930, an iconic high-performance machine. The Porsche posted a 0 to 60 mile per hour time of 5 seconds and a quarter mile time of 13.3 seconds, but the GNX was still quicker. For a blacked-out, V6-powered Buick to outrun legends of the era wasn't just surprising, it was downright humiliating for the competition. And here's the thing, the GNX was an automatic. It didn't need a high-revving V8 or a manual transmission to put down its power. The 204R transmission and the GNX's monstrous torque made launching effortless. There were no missed shifts, no drama, just raw acceleration. Unfortunately, the GNX was a one-year-only affair. After 1987, Buick pulled the plug on the Grand National and its high-performance turbo V6 program. The GNX, limited to just 547 units, became an instant collector's item. At the time, the GNX cost around $30,000, equivalent to roughly $80,000 today. That was steep for a Buick, but those who bought one knew they had something special. Today, the GNX is one of the most sought-after American cars of the 1980s. Well-preserved examples routinely sell for over $200,000, with ultra-low mileage cars fetching even more. In 2022, A pristine GNX with just 8.5 miles on the odometer sold for a staggering $275,000 at auction. So why does the Buick GNX still hold such legendary status? Because it was an underdog. It was a car no one expected, a Buick that could outrun the best from Detroit, Stuttgart, and Maranello. It proved that muscle cars didn't need V8s to be fast. It was a swan song for an era when American performance was thought to be dead. The GNX was more than just a fast car. It was a statement, a final defiant roar from an unexpected champion. And that's why, even decades later, the 1987 Buick GNX remains one of the most iconic muscle cars of all time.